Welcome, 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 terrible tendies, to the last week of the 2016 fantasy football season. It has been an amazing season so far. I can't wait now for the playoffs, and that's what we're here to talk about this morning. Right now, we are coming up, by the time this gets posted, probably around about an hour before kickoff, and we are looking at some really amazing tight races going into the final chapter of this season. We're going to start and kind of go through team by team and take a look at what's the best you can do, what's the worst you can do, and just kind of look at some key matchups going on this week. So we're going to start at the top of the list. We're going to start with those teams that are 7-3. So we're going to take a look first here at Jim Kelly's Little Nippers. One of the things I want to highlight with them, got my little cheat sheet. You'll probably see me scrolling around down here. One of the things I want to highlight with Jim Kelly's Little Nippers, they are 7-3. They are seated right now number one because we look at the head-to-head matchups after we look at the records, and they have beaten both 12 Monkeys and Buyer's Remorse, which is a pretty big thing because Buyer's Remorse in particular has been crushing teams this year, especially the latter half of the season. I think, Jim Kelly, I think you got lucky facing them earlier in the season. But right now, sitting number one with a win, you will secure your spot as the number one overall team. Nobody would be able to touch you at that point. Now, there is a chance you could slip as far as third, but you are going to be safe in the playoffs no matter what. If you lose and both 12 Monkeys and Buyer's Remorse win, you're going to be sitting in third place at that point. Now, Buyer's Remorse currently is a 30-point favorite over Ambitious But Rubbish. So odds are that's probably going to pan out. Chicago Guns and 12 Monkeys, on the other hand, they're only about a 4.5 points as the spread right now. So we'll have to kind of see closely on that one. That one's going to have huge playoff implications here, that matchup there. So we'll circle back to that one in a little bit. On to 12 Monkeys. 12 Monkeys with the win. If Jim Kelly's Little Nippers lose, again, only about a 5-point favorite right now. So that's still wide open. If Jim Kelly were to lose and you got the win, 12 Monkeys, you would be number one in the Terrible Tennies Fantasy Football League, as you have beaten Buyer's Remorse as well, again, I believe, early in the season. Buyer's Remorse, 12 Monkeys, the worst you can do if you were to lose, you're going to fall, as worst would be fourth place. With a loss, if Jim Kelly's Little Nippers won and if Buyer's Remorse gets the win and you lose, you would fall to fourth place. And let's talk about why that would be. If you fall to fourth place, you're going to lose to Chicago Guns, meaning that you and Chicago Guns would then have the same record. He would beat you out in the tiebreaker. So you're going to either be going at first place or fourth place right now, depending on how the standings work. On to Buyer's Remorse. The best place that you could boo, you could, in theory, become first, and that actually is a very probable chance of happening based on how you've been playing. Right now, you are sitting at 30-point favorite, as we've just said probably 3 times already. The other two only 5 points. So if they both lose, both 12 Monkeys and Jim Kelly's Little Nippers lose, and of course you would be first. The worst possible spot, if you lose and both 12 Monkeys and Jim Kelly's Little Nippers win, you're going to be sitting right where you're at. Now, there is a chance that you could fall to second place, and that's, again, with Chicago Guns. They're the big spoiler. Chicago Guns, you get that win against 12 Monkeys today, and if the Nippers win as well, then that means Buyer's Remorse is going to move up to second place there. So lots of things are going to be looking at that 12 Monkeys Chicago Guns game. We're going to be keeping a close eye on that. So let's talk about those Chicago Guns. Chicago Guns, if you win and both Buyer's Remorse and the Nippers also lose, that means all 3 of the top 3 lose, you would move into second place, as you have beaten then 12 Monkeys. You would have beaten Jesus Tits MD. That has nothing to do with this. I don't know why I brought that up, but you would have beaten also Jim Kelly's Little Nippers. So if Buyer's Remorse lose, Jim Kelly's Little Nippers lose, and you win, second place is what we had to you. Worst possible place, you're still going to be making the playoffs even if you do lose, would be fifth place. No matter what else happens, because I am playing no pun intended, if you lose and hold at 6-5, you already lost to Cooper. Stop barking at people. Rude. You did lose to No Pun Intended and myself. So if you lose and we both end up with the same record, either No Pun Intended or us, we'll be moving ahead of you. So if you lose, you're moving to fifth. Win, you'll be second place. Now, the next teams we're going to look to is we're going to bounce down to the people at the bottom of the list. We're going to talk about Vagenda of Manaside and big old TDs here before we get into the big menagerie that is everybody else in the middle at 5-5 and 4-6. So Vagenda of Manaside 3-7 with the win. Best place you can do is end up at 11th place there, in line for that Chauncey game here in a couple of weeks. If you lose, also going to be 11th place because no matter what happens here, even if you're tied with big old TDs record wise, you did beat them earlier in the season. So win or lose, 11th, and that means big old TDs, unfortunately for you, win or lose, you are going to be entering the playoffs in 12th place. So it was a really wacky season this season, but I'm still flabbergasted at how all of the different records broke out, and we have one person at 2-8, and nobody else is near that. Just craziness there. But best or worst for both of you, 11th and 12th places will be had. Now, for everybody else, let's go ahead. We're going to talk about the four teams. Four teams are all tied at 5-5. You've got T.I. Bionic Man, no punt intended, Ambitious But Rubbish, and myself, Nuck Nuck Moose K. Now, no punt intended, and I play each other this week. So that's going to be the biggest thing that can really tilt some stuff back and forth, because we have beaten totally different teams between the two of us. So depending on what happens with T.I. Bionic Man, Ambitious But Rubbish, even Lock, Stock, and Doc and Jesus Teats as we get into it, who are both 4-6 right now, depending on what happens with our teams, depending on No Punt and I, is going to make a huge difference with what happens. So let's take a first look here at T.I. Bionic Man. Now, as we sit at 5-5, T.I. Bionic Man has the break there, because they have beaten both No Punt Intended and Ambitious But Rubbish, two other 5-5 teams. I lost to Ambitious But Rubbish, and I'm playing No Punt now, so that's where I fell down a little bit there. You also got to look at points 4, then is that next tier tiebreaker. So if we look at T.I. Bionic Man, the best place that he can finish is right where he's at right now, 5th place. With a win, he secures his 5th place victory. With a loss, the worst that would happen would be that if No Punt Intended and Ambitious But Rubbish got the win, T.I. Bionic Man, you could be looking at missing out on the playoffs. So if No Punt wins, that means I lose. If Ambitious But Rubbish wins, that means Buyer's Remorse loses, and that has no bearing on you. But because of the win-losses and who you've beaten and who's beaten you, if you lose today and No Punt wins, which is very probable right now, the line on that game between us is only 5.5 points. And if somehow Ambitious But Rubbish can get the win, which right now he's got a 30-point favor to have to make up, you could actually miss the playoffs. Again, very unlikely, but still a possibility. No Punt Intended with the win. And then if Chicago Guns, T.I., and Ambitious But Rubbish all lose, you could move up to as far as 4th place. So the reigning champion could make a really late gun up there, because you've already beaten Chicago Guns this season. So that's where we would have some of that tiebreak there if Chicago Guns falls to 12 Monkeys, which again, close game right now. Very easily could happen. If we look at T.I. Bionic Man, Lock, Stock, and Doc, right now, as it sits, T.I. Bionic Man is a 13-point favorite. Again, that wouldn't take much to change there. And Ambitious But Rubbish, again, that's the big one that we have to have that mountain to climb. But if all those things fall into place, you could be up to 4th place there if those guys win. Now, on the flip side, you could totally miss the playoffs and fall down as low as 10th place if you lose, and then both Lock, Stock, and Doc, Ambitious But Rubbish, and Jesus Teats get the win. Now, Jesus Teats right now is sitting at about a 19-point favorite versus big old TD, so that's almost a foregone conclusion. Sorry, probably not. I don't want to say that. Buyer's Remorse, Ambitious But Rubbish is really a foregone conclusion, so I highly doubt that you're going to fall as clear down to 10th, but there's a lot of room in there depending on what happens where you could fall down to 10. Jesus Teats MD and No Punt losing, that's going to put you guys at the same records, and I believe Jesus Teats beat you, No Punt, earlier in the season, so going to have to take a close look there. Moving on to Ambitious But Rubbish, also at 5-5. With the win, if Chicago Guns and TI Bionic Man lose, which again, both of those fairly capable could happen, you would end up with fifth place. So you could have a chance to shoot up there, really improve your stead going into the playoffs. With a loss, you are still going to make the playoffs no matter what happens here. Ambitious But Rubbish. This is what's crazy. TI Bionic Man, no pun intended, are both seated ahead of you right now because of win losses. But if you lose, the worst you can do because of the people below you and above you is 7th or 8th place, depending on how a tiebreaker goes. So if you lose and TI Bionic Man, Lock, Stock, and Doc, and Jesus Tits all win, which again, those three are fairly possible of happening, including your loss. No matter what, depending on the point tiebreakers, you are still probably going to be 7th or 8th place. So should be good there no matter what happens here. You should make the playoffs. Now, mark my words, that probably won't happen. You and I are in the same boat. Even if I lose, the worst possible spot that I can have by my figures right now is I would be 8th place. I do have a chance to move up to 4th place here with a win as long as Chicago Guns and Ambitious lose. Right now, Chicago Guns is looking to be the 4.5 point favorite, while Ambitious But Rubbish again is a 30-point underdog. But I am excited that I could move up as far as 4th. Otherwise, I'm going to have a really, really hard road. I'm hoping that Jim Kelly, you get the win here, because I would love to be able to get that. I feel much better going up against Jim Kelly than I would going up against Buyer's Remorse. Sorry to say, Buyer's Remorse is a hot team right now. And I lost to both of them earlier in the season, so who the hell, doesn't really matter. Lock, Stock, and Doc. Now we're going to take a couple of looks at our last two teams. The last men in, so to speak. We've got Lock, Stock, and Doc at 4-6, and we have Jesus Tits MD 4-6. Right now, Lock, Stock, and Doc gets the nod ahead, as they beat Jesus Tits earlier in the season. However, Lock, Stock, and Doc, you could move into the playoffs either in the 6th or 7th place, depending on the tiebreakers with points 4, as long as Ambitious But Rubbish loses and you get the win. Now, right now, Lock, Stock, and Doc, again, as we mentioned earlier, you are a 13-point underdog against TI Bionic Man. But if you can pull out that win, you're going to have an very, very high chance to make it into the playoffs. Now, if you lose and Jesus Tits MD and Vagenda of Manaside win, now Vagenda of Manaside, they are currently sitting at, I believe, 5 points, essentially a 5-point underdog. But if they can pull out that win and you end up with the loss and Jesus Tits win, you're going to end up at 11th place, still missing the playoffs, but being really, really close. And I guess that has to be wrong. You'd have to be probably 10th place there. Yeah, you'd be 10th place, being very, very close to 1 loss, 2 losses. You could end up in that Chauncey Bowl then after that. Now, Jesus Tits MD, last one of the week here. If you win and then no punt loses, Ambitious But Rubbish loses, and TI Bionic Man loses, all of which very close, more than likely will happen, depending on what happens there, you could pull up to 7th place. So you've got a really good chance of making the playoffs there with a win. And then if everything else holds true with all the line marks and everything like that, you could actually still make the playoffs there at a 7 seed. Worst place, if you lose, you're gonna stay right where you're at a 10 seed. So I'm not gonna fall back anymore, but that 10th spot there with a loss is gonna be pretty devastating for you. That's it, everybody. So as we look through it, the likelihood of everything right now, I would say Jim Kelly's Little Nippers, 12 Monkeys, Buyer's Remorse, Chicago Guns. You guys are all locked and loaded, ready to go. Ambitious But Rubbish, myself, I believe we are going to be locked and loaded, ready to rock and roll. That means there are 2 spots wide open, and it's all going to come down to the key matchups to really watch this week are going to be mine, no pun intended, Nuck Nuck Moose K, and then the other really huge one is going to be 12 Monkeys and Chicago Guns. Let's take a quick look at their box score. Right now, Brandon Cooks, 7.2 points is what he put up on Thursday night. everything else is wide open. So, I mean, that game could go a lot of different ways. It's going to have some really huge playoff implications if Chicago Guns can get the win. The other big one to keep an eye on, T.I. Bionic Man, Lock, Stock, and Dock. Little bit of ground to make up here for Lock, Stock, and Dock as we take a look at the preview for that. Kelvin Benjamin didn't quite do what you wanted him to do, only 6.5 points. So we'll have to see how the rest of that week pans out. But yeah, those are going to be the real key matchups that everybody will want to focus in on. Are they going to be those two? So I wish everybody good luck. Looking at the time here, I should be able to get this up before kickoff so we can all take a look at it. But yeah, good luck, everybody.
And may the odds be ever in your favor.